All right, buckle up because we're diving headfirst into the Inflation Reduction Act. This thing's massive, like trying to sum up a whole season of your favorite show in like 5 minutes. We're talking climate change, healthcare, taxes. The IRA's got its fingers in a lot of pies. And we're going beyond the headlines, using your stack of research to uncover the, wait, really? Moments buried in this mountain of legislation. I mean, remember Build Back Better, all the drama, the back and forth. Well, think of the IRA as its more practical but still ambitious younger sibling.
It's true, the IRA had a bumpy ride to becoming law. To get the full picture, we need to rewind back to the Build Back Better Act, a much bigger, bolder plan that ultimately stalled out in Congress. The IRA rose from those ashes as a compromise, squeezed through a special budget process called reconciliation.
Budget reconciliation. Sounds a little dry, even for us policy nerds. What's the significance of this reconciliation thing?
Think of it like the congressional fast track. It only needs a simple majority in the Senate to pass, bypassing that whole filibuster threat, which needs, 60 votes. Getting that many senators on board, especially for such a sweeping bill, near impossible.
So a bit of a power play, then.
Exactly. And Senator Joe Manchin, he was a major player in this whole saga. He had big concerns about Build Back Better, thought it was too much, too fast. His vote was key, so his worries about inflation and, excessive government spending really forced the Democrats to scale back their ambitions.
Less drama, more compromise. Got it. But even in its slimmed-down form, the IRA still made some pretty hefty promises, right? Especially when it came to climate change. This was supposed to be the biggest climate investment ever, wasn't it?
That was the big talking point for sure. And it wasn't just the sheer amount of money. It was about the U.S. stepping up as a leader in the global fight against climate change.
So lots of hype, lots of hope. But let's be real. There's always a bit of skepticism with these big promises, right? So let's get into the weeds. What did those initial projections actually say about the IRA's impact?
Well, the Congressional Budget Office, the CBO, those are the numbers guys, they crunched the numbers and figured the IRA would bring in around $738 billion, mostly through tax reforms and changes to prescription drug pricing, that kind of thing. And they projected that a big chunk of that, something like $891 billion, would go towards energy and climate initiatives.
We're talking serious cash. But did they actually think it would, reduce inflation? Because, I mean, that's the whole point of the name, right?
Ironically, the CBO's take was that the impact on inflation would be pretty minimal, at least in the short term. But there were other experts, like those at the World Economic Forum, who argued that in the long run, it could actually help lower inflation.
Interesting. Not everyone was on the same page about the inflation part. What about jobs? You got to talk about jobs when you're trying to sell a big bill like this.
Right, job creation was a big selling point. Estimates were all over the place, but they ranged from something like 900,000 to 1.5 million new jobs, mostly in renewable energy, manufacturing, construction, those sectors.
So big promises on climate change, big spending plans, and the potential for a whole lot of new jobs. But as we know, good intentions don't always translate into smooth sailing. Let's dive into some specifics, starting with the IRA's impact on climate change. Did it live up to the hype? We'll tackle that right after the break.
All right, we're back and ready to dig into the IRA's climate impact. Was it all talk and no action, or did it actually deliver? Let's start with the positives. Did the IRA really make a difference on climate change? Well, it's a mixed bag. You've got groups like the Rhodium Group. They're pretty well respected in the energy world. They predicted the IRA could significantly cut U.S. greenhouse gas emissions, like potentially enough to get us back on track with the Paris Agreement's goal of limiting warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius.
That's a big deal, right? That's like averting a disaster at the last second. But how? How did they plan to pull that off?
Think of it like a multi-pronged approach to tackling emissions. The IRA throws incentives and investments at the problem from all angles. For everyday people, there are tax credits to make buying electric vehicles more affordable. Plus, funding to make homes more energy efficient, like better insulation and appliances. And of course, a huge boost for clean energy technologies like solar and wind power.
Right. Make the cleaner options cheaper and easier to access, and people are more likely to make the switch. Makes sense. But I've also heard some grumbling that the IRA isn't all rosy when it comes to the environment, that it actually helps out the fossil fuel industry too.
Yeah, there are definitely parts of the IRA that benefit fossil fuels. For example, there's a requirement for the government to auction off oil and gas drilling leases on federal lands. And they have to do this before even considering leasing those lands for wind or solar projects.
Wait, that seems a little counterproductive, doesn't it? It's like trying to eat healthy but still keeping a drawer full of candy.
You're not wrong. And it really highlights the compromises that had to be made to get the IRA passed. They needed to appease both sides, those pushing for climate action and those with ties to the fossil fuel industry.
So, a win for the climate, but maybe not a complete victory. Well, let's shift gears to another area where the IRA aimed to make a big splash: healthcare, specifically those ridiculously high prescription drug prices. This is a big deal for a lot of people, especially seniors on Medicare. The big promise here was lower drug costs. Did the IRA actually deliver?
The IRA's impact on drug prices is definitely one of its most debated aspects.
Yep.
One of its key provisions allows Medicare to directly negotiate drug prices with pharmaceutical companies, and this applies to certain high-cost medications.
Hold on, Medicare couldn't do that before. I mean, it seems like a no-brainer being able to negotiate lower prices.
Right. It's been a long-standing frustration that Medicare, with all its millions of beneficiaries, had less power than private insurance companies when negotiating drug prices.
So why all the pushback from the pharmaceutical industry then? They couldn't have been happy about that.
They argued that allowing Medicare to negotiate prices would stifle innovation, that it would limit their ability to invest in research and development of new drugs.
So basically they're saying we need those high prices to keep making new and better drugs. Tough situation because people need affordable medications now.
Exactly. It's a balancing act between encouraging innovation and ensuring access to affordable health care. But despite the opposition, the program did move forward. In 2023, Medicare released a list of the first 10 drugs selected for these price negotiations, including treatments for diabetes, heart failure, and some cancers.
Okay, so a win for Medicare and potentially for millions of Americans struggling with those drug costs. But something tells me this isn't the end of the story.
You're right. Big Pharma wasn't going to go down without a fight. Several drug makers have filed lawsuits claiming the Medicare drug price negotiation program is unconstitutional.
Of course they did. When billions of dollars are on the line, you use every tool in the box.
Exactly. These lawsuits could end up in the Supreme Court, and the outcome could have a huge impact on the future of drug pricing in the U.S.
Talk about a cliffhanger. So even when a law is passed, its impact can be shaped by legal challenges, politics, and even just the logistics of putting these complex policies into action. And that brings us to the nitty-gritty of implementation. We'll be back in a moment to uncover more about how the IRA's ambitions have played out in the real world. Stay tuned.
And we're back for the final stretch of our Inflation Reduction Act deep dive. We've talked about the promises, the potential downsides, and now it's time to see how this thing is actually playing out because, passing a law and actually making it work, two very different things.
Oh, absolutely. And with the law as big and complex as the IRA, there were bound to be some hiccups along the way.
So what's been the most surprising thing you've seen so far? What's really caught your eye? Well, it's been fascinating to see how differently the IRA has been received in different states. The Biden administration loves to tout the successes, of course, but there's been some resistance, especially from certain states that haven't exactly rolled out the red carpet for the IRA.
Really? Why would any state say no to this? Especially when it comes to things like clean energy investments. That's jobs, economic growth, the whole package.
It just goes to show you how much politics factors into everything, even when it's something that seems like a no-brainer, like accepting federal funds.
Yeah.
Take Florida, for instance. Their governor initially refused to accept money for energy efficiency rebates.
Seriously, turning down free money? What was their logic there?
It came down to concerns about federal overreach, basically. The governor argued that accepting the funds would give the federal government too much say in how the state handles its energy policies. There was a lot of pushback, and eventually they did change their tune. But it just highlights that even with something like the IRA, there can be unexpected political roadblocks.
All politics is local, right? But politics aside, what about those Buy American provisions in the IRA? That seemed like a pretty big deal at the time.
It was, and it's a perfect example of how even well-intentioned policies can backfire. The idea was to give American manufacturing a boost, particularly for things like electric vehicle batteries. But there have been concerns that this whole Made in America requirement could actually make it harder for the EV market to grow.
How so? It seems counterintuitive.
Well, right now, the U.S. doesn't have the capacity to produce all the materials needed for these batteries on a large scale. So forcing companies to only use American-made materials, it can mean higher costs, production delays, and ultimately EVs that are less affordable for the average person.
The law of unintended consequences strikes again, trying to help one area, but potentially hurting another in the process.
Exactly. And then there's the labor aspect to consider. The IRA is supposed to create jobs, especially in clean energy, but some labor unions are worried about what this transition means for their members.
Makes sense. You've got people who've worked in traditional energy, like coal or oil and gas, for years. And now, with the push for clean energy, their jobs could be at risk.
Precisely. And those concerns are valid. Retraining programs, job placement help, making sure there are fair labor practices in these new green industries, all of that is crucial. The move toward clean energy needs to be a just transition, one that doesn't leave entire communities behind.
It's a good reminder that even with the best intentions, there are always trade-offs and unexpected challenges. And it's through these deep dives that we can really start to untangle the complexities of something as impactful as the Inflation Reduction Act.
Couldn't agree more. The IRA, it's a work in progress. It's full impact. Well, that's something we'll be grappling with for years to come.
It's like we've planted a seed and now we're watching it grow, but we don't know exactly what kind of fruit it'll bear.
And that's what makes it all so fascinating. We're at a turning point, and the IRA is a driving force, but how it all unfolds, that's still being written.
What a great note to end on. The IRA, it's more than just a piece of legislation. It's a story, and it's still unfolding. And as we've learned, it's a story full of unexpected twists and turns. So next time you hear about the IRA, remember there's always more to the story than meets the eye. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the Inflation Reduction Act. Until next time, stay curious